Ladies and gentlemen, when I first started doing videos online, I was doing opioids, and Terrain Rain was another one that was putting out a lot of content on opioids, and he started long before I did. And, this has never been a foreign topic to me because I had family members that struggled with drugs, mainly cousins. And I saw how hard it was on some of my family members, just to watch people, within your family struggle. It is a tough thing. It's never been easy. But one thing about this opioids plague, it has gone on and very strong for well over 20 years now. And even the experts are saying there's no end in sight. And and that's really sad because they said the country is going through a new wave of an opioid crisis. So let's get into it, y'all. Now, we know this has been going on since the late 90s. So, when Dr. Art Van Zee finally understood the scale of the disaster looming over his corner of rural Virginia, he naively imagined the drug industry would be just as alarmed. So, the longest serving doctor in the struggle for a former mining town, coal mining town, yeah, I would imagine you would have a lot of people on it there, of St. Charles, set out in early 2000 to tell pharmaceutical executives, federal regulators, Congress, and anyone who would listen that arrival of the new powerful opioid painkiller was destroying lives and families and laying the ground for a much bigger catastrophe. I have to agree with him on that one. It certainly have been that big time. So more than 2 decades later, as Van Zee surveys the devastation caused by OxyContin and the epidemic of opioid addiction, he is still in disbelief at the callous indifference to suffering as one opportunity after another was missed to stop what has become the worst drug epidemic in US history. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Even the crack epidemic did not go on this long. It didn't. It did not last for over 2 decades like this. To be honest with you, let's see, they said like around 98, somewhere around there, about 98 is when it started. So they're shocked that it actually has become even worse than, the first wave that we saw of it. So they said now you got a new generation of people being impacted by this. The region has gone through a lot, but the epidemic is the worst thing that ever happened to Central Appalachia in terms of human cost and devastation to individuals and families. You've got all these families that came apart, children living with dysfunctional parents. Yeah, you even saw that back when I was starting on YouTube. It was not unusual for children to be in the back seat and their parents would be in the front seat of the car, all strung out, slumped over. And I most certainly did feel bad for those children. That is definitely no laughing matter. You've got all these families and children who learned from their parents to take drugs from a young age. The devastation is going on for generations. It didn't have to happen. There were so many missed opportunities, so many it could have been stopped. Now they're saying they don't see an end in sight. As it turns out, the drug industry was alarmed by Van Z's warning, but not in a way he expected. I saw the doctor as a threat to profit. And so, from the very beginning, Big Pharma responded by working to discredit Van Z and others like him who rang the alarm on high strength opioids creating mass addiction. Years later, there have been other opportunities to slow the crisis down before it evolved from prescription pills, and he said they just kept missing these opportunities. So, back when I was doing this is when fentanyl was really starting to go strong in the country and other drugs. And it claimed, well, their numbers is 800,000 American lives over the past quarter of a century, with predictions of another million at the end of this decade. But federal regulators and prosecutors failed to seize the moment. Perhaps the most disturbing of it all was the US was still failing to learn the lessons of a unique American catastrophe to break the influence of corporate money over medicine, regulation, and political accountability. Now, if you remember, Donald Trump had set up a commission and they were discouraged. In fact, Chris Christie was on that commission, if you remember, and he was disappointed because he was saying that Trump really wasn't paying attention. He was not taking their advice, and he didn't see the point. And if you remember when Donald Trump was running back then, he said he was going to stop the epidemic. So a lot of people were hopeful that he would go and, put tough measures in place to do something about the addiction and all of the deaths that were going on in the country at the time. And folks ended up very disappointed that that commission and everything he promised did not pan out at all. And I remember another complaint that commission had. They said Trump was not funding them, so they were pretty limited in what they could do. Okay, so they said the OxyContin and opioid problem was brought this huge number of people in our region into the substance using world, and for so many good years of treatment wasn't available. And you know what, the pandemic also caused um, a lot of people that were going to rehabilitation to fall off the bandwagon. Because of the epidemic, they were not getting treatment, so many of them went back to doing the drug again. And they lost a lot of people that was on the road of recovery, and that all fizzled out when the lockdown occurred. But I've got they said there are several things going on. So you still got the opioid, OxyContin, you have meth, you have fentanyl, and it's much worse than I imagine and I would ever be. The lessons haven't been learned. So that's what this doctor is saying. He said America has not learned any lessons from this whole epidemic that has been going on. So in St. Charles in the 70s, He was saying it was a struggling town back then. And this town of St. Charles is west of Kentucky and Tennessee. He said it was a place so much that, it was not really one of those really rich towns. It was a rural town. And he left and then returned back in 1976 and stayed ever since working in his community health clinic. St. Charles, surrounding Lee County, once thrived off of coal mines. Thousands of men worked at the largest coal mine, which was Bonnie Blue. Saturday night, you couldn't walk through town. It was shoulder to shoulder. It had hotels, grocery stores full of life. But by the time the new doctor arrived in town, the mines were in retreat and the area struggled as incomes plummeted. Like other parts of Appalachia, distant coal barons got rich, plundering the coal and left behind to sustain the coal mining towns when the seams ran dry. Some in the regions likened their history to the colonial exploration of Africa and Asia. After the mines closed, and you got that high unemployment now that the mines closed, the population in St. Charles collapsed to the point where in 2022, the Virginia legislature removed the town's charter because no one ran for office for two elections. Wow, that's crazy. Many of those who remained were ripe for the plucking when the drug industry came pushing the opioid painkillers in the late 90s. And one drug in particular, Oxycontin, was so powerful, it wasn't long before it was known as the heroin in a pill. The mix of aging laborers with torn out bodies seeking pain relief and young people looking for escape turned out to be a rich market for big pharma. I can imagine, coal mining, that's a tough job. Yeah, I guess your body would be torn out. So he said he saw the first flickers of the epidemic in 1999 when patients began telling him about partners and children suddenly hooked on Oxycontin. Soon, the drug seemed to be everywhere. The manufacturer, Purdue Pharma, was running one of the biggest market campaigns in the drug industry history to persuade doctors to prescribe Oxycontin on the grounds that it was less addictive and more effective than any other opioid painkillers. Neither claims were true. In fact, Oxycontin's high narcotic content made it more dangerous. Most American doctors had little training in opioids for pain management, so they tend to accept at face value the Purdue sales rep claim, though they had no medical training at all. So, still, he was certain the drug maker knew the situation on the ground. It would do the right thing. So, unfortunately, that was not the case. you know. So this doctor goes on to write letters, and his letters largely went ignored by Purdue. And he kept writing the company, comparing the growing catastrophe its drug was causing parts of Appalachia. In areas of New York and San Francisco began seeing the epidemic there. By 2001, the situation was so bad in Lee County that a town hall meeting at St. Charles, and they tried to petition the FDA to withdraw the drug altogether. There were 800 people in a little high school auditorium over the OxyContin problem because it was painful, it was acute. There was nobody untouched by it. Finally, Purdue agreed to meet with Van Zee. He proposed the company send warning letters to doctors across the country, alerting them to raise OxyContin addiction and death and end the market of the drug except for those who really need it, like cancer patients. I back then I had someone that worked for me and they were taking OxyContin. And I remember that. And they used to have a lot of mood swings. I noticed that in them too. One day he would be fine, and then the next day he would just be upset all day. And I did not quite understand it, but I really believed the drug was doing that to him. So, anyway, by then, OxyContin was earning Purdue, they said $1.5 billion a year, making its owners, the Sackler family, extremely rich. Neither had any intent of letting a small town doctor and other critics of their drugs get in the way of booming profits. The industry lined up heavyweight pain specialists and its pay to defend the mass prescription of opioids at a rate far beyond any other country. Yeah, because that was one of the things I did a video on, of how America had the biggest um, consumers of opioids out of the entire world. All right, so one of the specialists who gave evidence was taking money from 16 pharmaceutical companies, including Purdue. Yeah, well, when you got people taking money, quite naturally, they're not going to do anything or even try. They want the money, they want their big check. So, mm, over the decade, we will find out that there has been a lot of unfortunate errors made, how much we have done with how little knowledge we have had to do so. So he's talking about the surges of overdoses in the country and the human cost. So, yeah, I know the rural areas definitely suffered because I saw those stories out there all the time. In the early years of opioids, the number of children taken into care or fostered quadrupled in Lee County. That's just a fraction because so many of the children didn't go into foster care but got taken by grandparents or cousins. They weren't registered with official statistics. So, what they're saying is the children that may have lost a parent or a parent might have been jailed because of their addiction, because when they're addicted, the crimes always happen, y'all, because one thing about a drug addiction, you always need money to keep it going. And one thing about a drug addict, they're always going to run out of money. So once they do, they'll be out here committing all kinds of crimes. And that exactly is what happened here in America. So again, Big Pharma slipped away. Prosecutors negotiated a deal in which Purdue paid a large fine, but was allowed to go on selling, opioids largely unfettered. And a deal was struck for its executives to plead guilty to misdemeanors and avoid jail time. Yeah, then how are they inspired to change? They're not. That's not a punishment. That's not a punishment at all. So, y'all, what he is pretty much saying is the country is going through another terrible wave and it's getting worse. The addiction is now on another generation. and the death toll is continuing to go up. So, at this point, do you think it can be repaired? I don't. I think the damage is done. Not enough people are willing to do anything about it in politics. You don't see a lot of politics. You don't even hear politicians talking about opioids. You heard it a little bit when Donald Trump was in office and maybe before then, but you don't hear politicians talking about anything pertaining to drug addiction now. All you hear is Ukraine, Israel, the migrants coming across the border. That's certainly getting all the attention, but something like this that is still going strong across the country, it's not getting any shine in the media. And really, mainstream news was never big on talking about the opioid plague at all. I think most of the videos or information was coming from online. It was not coming from mainstream news at all. But y'all, let me know what you think now that they're saying, you know, this thing has gotten far worse. And the doctor in this story, Van Z, is saying he don't believe this will ever be resolved. They said it's a real tough addiction to beat. Very few people are successful. The vast majority are not. Please leave your comment and subscribe. Don't forget to hit on the notification bell, and I'll see you on the next video. Peace, family.